The Adventures of Michael McKoy Jr. and Carl. Grocery Store Chaos. A McKoy Vision production. Michael McKoy Jr. and Carl the pigeon strutted into the grocery store, determined to blend in and have a totally ordinary shopping experience. As they walked through the aisles, Michael reminded Carl, "No funny business. Just two regular guys getting groceries, okay?" Carl gave a nod, as much of a nod as a pigeon can manage, and pecked at Michael's ear, which Michael took as agreement. But as soon as they passed the seafood section, Carl's eyes locked onto the lobster tank. His feathers fluffed up and he let out an indignant coo. "No, Carl. Just keep walking," Michael said firmly. But it was too late. Carl took off like a bullet, wings flapping, and dive-bombed into the tank, going after the biggest, meanest lobster he could find. Wings and claws flew as Carl and the lobster went at it, water splashing everywhere while startled shoppers shrieked. "Carl, get out of there!" Michael shouted, reaching into the tank and pulling Carl free just as the lobster latched onto his tail feathers. Michael pried the lobster off and hustled down the aisle, dripping wet and muttering apologies to everyone nearby. They managed to reach the poultry section where things calmed down. Or so Michael thought. But as soon as Carl spotted the chicken display, he froze in shock, his little pigeon eyes widening with horror. "Carl, it's just chicken," Michael said, trying to move him along. But Carl started cooing frantically, clearly thinking he was staring at some distant relatives. With a burst of energy, Carl leapt from Michael's shoulder and began flapping wildly around the display, knocking bottles of mustard, ketchup, and mayonnaise off the shelves in a fit of pigeon despair. Condiments went flying as Carl squawked at the chicken packages, causing a condiment landslide. Michael, struggling to regain control, finally managed to corner Carl by the barbecue sauce. "Carl, buddy, they're just chicken. Not your family. You're a pigeon, remember?" Carl cocked his head, considering this, and finally gave a soft, uncertain coo, seeming to calm down. Michael let out a sigh of relief, wiped mustard off his arm, and guided Carl down the next aisle. To Michael's amazement, they actually completed the rest of their shopping without further incident. Just as they were heading for a clean checkout and a smooth exit, Carl, who had been sitting on the conveyor belt, managed to get his feathers tangled in the machinery. Michael's eyes widened in horror as the belt kept pulling Carl in, slowly plucking him feather by feather. Carl squawked and flailed, looking more and more like a tiny, featherless chicken himself. By the time Michael freed him, Carl was mostly bald, his remaining feathers sticking out in odd directions. Michael stared at his half-naked bird, then at the stunned cashier, who looked like they were about to faint. With as much dignity as he could muster, Michael held Carl close, whispering, "Come on, buddy. Let's go home." And as they walked out of the store, Carl's featherless head held high, they left behind a trail of feathers and a story that grocery store would never forget.